My husband humiliated me in front of 40 people on a Saturday night. By Sunday morning, karma had already started working. I did not plan any of it. I did not make any calls. I did not whisper anything to anyone or pull any strings or engineer a single moment of what happened next. I simply watched. And what I watched was so precisely calibrated to the thing he had done that I have spent the time since wondering whether the universe has a better sense of timing than any of us give it credit for. Let me tell you about the party first. My name is Elena. My husband's name is Greg. We had been married for 7 years, together for 9, and we were the kind of couple that looked, from the outside, like they had it figured out. Nice house. 2 good incomes. A social life that was active and full. Greg's colleagues liked us. Our neighbors liked us. We were invited to things and we showed up and we were pleasant, and nobody looking at us from across a dinner table would have guessed that the fault lines were already forming. The party was at our friend Marcus and Tina's house. A birthday celebration for Tina, her 40th, a big deal, carefully planned, the kind of party that required a caterer and a playlist and a guest list that had been curated over 3 weeks of anxious text messages. I had known Tina for 11 years. She was one of my closest friends. I had helped her pick the dress she wore that night, a deep burgundy wrap dress that she looked absolutely beautiful in, and I had written a toast that I had been quietly proud of. Greg had been in a mood since we left the house. I noticed it in the car. A tightness around his jaw. Short answers. The kind of silence that is not peaceful but pressurized, like something looking for a way out. I asked if he was okay. He said he was fine in the way that means the opposite. I should have pressed harder. I know that now. But we arrived, and the party was warm and loud and full of people I loved, and Greg seemed to loosen up after his first drink, and I let myself relax and believe that whatever it was had passed. It had not passed. It had been waiting. The toast happened around 9:30. Tina's husband Marcus had organized a loose sequence, a few close friends, then family, then Tina herself. I was third in the rotation. I stood up with my glass of wine and I said the things I had written, about Tina's generosity and her laugh and the specific way she showed up for the people she loved, and by the end several people were dabbing at their eyes and Tina was hugging me with her whole body, and it was one of those good, warm moments that a night builds toward. I sat back down next to Greg. He was on his 4th drink. I noticed the number because I had been peripherally aware of it all evening, not with alarm exactly, more with the low-level monitoring you develop when you have lived with someone long enough to know their patterns. 4 drinks in 2 hours was not catastrophic for Greg. But 4 drinks in 2 hours in the particular mood he had been in since we left the house, that was a different calculation. Marcus stood to give his toast next. It was heartfelt and funny and long in the way husbands' toasts sometimes are, and the room was laughing and engaged, and Greg leaned over to me in the middle of it and said, quietly but not quietly enough, "God, he really loves the sound of his own voice." The woman to my left, Tina's cousin, someone I had met twice, went slightly still. I put my hand on Greg's arm. "Hey," I said softly. He looked at me. His eyes had the particular quality they got after 4 drinks in a bad mood. Bright and flat at the same time. "What?" he said. Not quietly. "Let's just enjoy the toast," I said. He made a sound. Not a word. A sound, dismissive, the kind that carries. Marcus was still talking. A few people near us had glanced over. I felt the heat start in my chest. That particular heat, not anger yet, more like the early warning system. The one that says, something is about to happen and you cannot stop it. Greg picked up his glass. Drank. Set it down with a small clatter that was louder than it needed to be. And then Marcus said something lovely about Tina, something about the day they met, something genuine and vulnerable that made the room go quiet in the good way, and Greg laughed. Not with the room. Not at the sweetness of it. He laughed the wrong kind of laugh. Short and sharp and just loud enough to ripple out from our table in the silence that had just fallen. 40 people heard it. I know because 40 people looked at us. Including Tina. I want to describe what happened in my body in that moment, because it matters. My face went hot. Not with embarrassment for myself, I had not done anything. With something more complicated. With the particular pain of being publicly attached to a person who was behaving badly, and knowing that every person in that room who looked at us was also looking at me, and knowing that some of them were wondering what kind of woman sits next to that and says nothing. And knowing that I was, at that moment, saying nothing. Because what do? Stand up at your friend's birthday party and correct your husband in front of everyone? Create a scene that makes the moment even larger, even more memorable, even more damaging to Tina's evening? I did nothing. I looked at my hands. Marcus finished his toast. The room recovered. The applause was genuine and the evening moved forward, and Tina smiled at me across the room with an expression that told me she had seen everything and was not going to make it worse by acknowledging it in public. I loved her for that. And I sat there for the remaining 2 hours of that party, and I smiled at the right moments, and I talked to the people around me, and I was, by every external measure, fine. But underneath the fine, something had shifted. Something that had been bending for a while had finally made a sound. We drove home in silence. Not the pressurized silence of the drive there. A different silence. Emptier. The kind that follows something that cannot be untaken. At home, Greg went to the kitchen for a glass of water. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed and I stared at the floor, and I thought. Not about revenge. Not about what I was going to say or do or how I was going to make him understand. Just thought. About the past year. About the way his moods had been expanding, taking up more and more of the space in our marriage. About the small moments that I had been absorbing and excusing and absorbing again, like a surface that can only take so much. He came upstairs and stood in the doorway. "You're upset," he said. "Yes," I said. "It wasn't a big deal, Elena." "You laughed at Marcus," I said. At the most sincere moment of his toast. At Tina's birthday party. In front of 40 people. I looked up at him. It was a big deal. He opened his mouth. I watched him prepare the defense, the minimizing, the reframing, the version where my feelings were an overreaction to something small. "Don't," I said. Quietly. "Not tonight. I'm too tired." He looked at me for a moment. Then he went to his side of the bed. We did not speak again that night. Now I need to tell you about Sunday morning. Because Sunday morning is where this story becomes something other than a story about a bad night. Greg worked in business development at a mid-size company. His direct boss was a man named Patrick, someone Greg had spoken about frequently and with the particular mix of admiration and resentment that characterizes how some people talk about those who have power over them. Patrick had the final say on a promotion Greg had been pursuing for 8 months. A significant promotion, new title, new salary, a shift into a senior leadership track. Greg had been banking on it. Literally. He had been factoring the salary increase into conversations about renovating the kitchen and a vacation we'd been discussing. He was, by his own account, the strongest candidate. On Sunday morning, Greg's phone buzzed at 8:15. He read the message. I was making coffee with my back to him and I knew something had happened because the kitchen went very quiet in a specific way. I turned around. He was staring at his phone with the expression of someone who has been hit and hasn't finished processing the impact. "What happened?" I asked. He looked up. His face was doing something complicated and raw. "Patrick gave the promotion to David," he said. David was Greg's colleague. A year younger. Someone Greg had mentioned occasionally, always with a faint competitive edge. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it, whatever had happened between us the night before, I did not want this for him. Patrick's note says, he stopped. Looked back at the phone. He said David demonstrated better judgment and interpersonal awareness in cross-functional settings. He set the phone down. I picked up my coffee. Judgment and interpersonal awareness. The words settled in the kitchen like something physical. I did not say anything. I genuinely did not say anything, not because I was being strategically silent, but because there was nothing I could add that the moment hadn't already said with greater precision than I was capable of. Greg sat down at the kitchen table. He sat there for a long time. And I watched him, this man I had loved for 9 years, this man who had laughed the wrong laugh at the wrong moment in front of 40 people, sit with the particular discomfort of someone who is beginning, slowly and against their will, to connect some dots. I want to be honest about what happened next. Because this story is not a revenge story. It is something more real and more complicated than that. I did not feel triumphant on Sunday morning. I felt sad. I felt sad for Greg because the promotion had genuinely mattered to him and losing it was a real loss. I felt sad because the reason he lost it, judgment and interpersonal awareness, was something I could not pretend I hadn't been watching erode for more than a year. I felt sad because we had arrived at a place in our marriage where a Saturday night could contain everything it had contained and a Sunday morning could arrive with everything it had arrived with, and I was sitting in my kitchen trying to figure out what any of it meant. We talked that afternoon. A real conversation, longer and harder than the abbreviated exchange the night before. Greg talked about the promotion. About how blindsided he felt. About David, who had apparently been building relationships Greg had dismissed as unnecessary. I listened for a long time. And then I said, carefully, Greg, can I say something that I need you to really hear? He looked at me. Yeah. Last night wasn't the first time, I said. The comments about people. The impatience. The moods that spill out in public. I kept my voice steady. I've been absorbing it for a long time. And I've been making excuses for it. But what happened last night, and what happened this morning, I think they're connected. I think you're under a lot of pressure and it's coming out in ways that are hurting the people around you. A pause. Including me. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. This one had texture. I didn't realize, he started. I know you didn't, I said. That's part of what I'm telling you. He was quiet for a long moment. Do you think Patrick heard about the party? He said. It came out small, almost like something he hadn't meant to say out loud. I thought about 40 people. About Marcus and Tina and the room full of their friends. About the way these things have a way of traveling. I don't know, I said honestly. But I think it probably doesn't matter. I think Patrick sees something at work that he made a decision about. And I think the same thing I've been seeing at home. Greg looked at his hands. I need to do better, he said. Yes, I said. You do. The weeks that followed were not easy or simple. I want to say that clearly because stories like this have a way of skipping over the middle, the part where things don't resolve neatly and people are works in progress, and marriage is difficult in the specific way that anything worth having is difficult. Greg started seeing a therapist. Not because I asked him to, because he made the appointment himself, 2 weeks after the party, and told me about it afterward. That mattered. The fact that it came from him mattered more than the act itself. We had more real conversations in the 3 months after Tina's party than we had in the previous year combined. Some of them were hard. Some of them were the kind of honest that feels like surgery, necessary and painful and clarifying in ways that you couldn't have achieved without the cut. He apologized to Marcus and Tina. Separately and genuinely, not because I asked him to, but because he worked his way to understanding that it was the right thing. Marcus was gracious about it. Tina, who had known me for 11 years and therefore knew me well enough to know the full weight of what she was saying, told me privately that she thought it was one of the more genuinely accountable things she had seen a person do. I held on to that. The promotion did not come back. But 8 months later, in a different cycle, Greg was offered a position at a different company, one where his strengths were better matched and his history didn't carry the particular shadow of one bad year. He took it. He is, by every measure I can observe, doing better. We are still married. I say that not because it is the triumphant ending, it is simply the true one. Marriage is not a problem you solve. It is a thing you keep choosing, every day, and some days the choosing is easy and some days it costs you something, and the wisdom is in understanding the difference. I chose to stay. Greg chose to become someone more worth staying for. Those two choices, made in the same season, are the actual story. But I want to go back to Sunday morning for a moment. To the thing I felt when Greg read that message. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Not the clean, uncomplicated pleasure that people describe when karma arrives. What I felt was something quieter and stranger. I felt seen. Not by Greg. Not even exactly by the universe, though I understand why people reach for that framing. I felt seen by the truth. By the simple, impartial fact that behavior has consequences, not always, not immediately, not with the dramatic timing of a story, but often enough, in ways that are specific enough, that the connection is impossible to miss when it arrives. Greg had laughed the wrong laugh at the wrong moment. And the universe had said, judgment and interpersonal awareness. Not to punish him. Not to reward me. Just to tell the truth, the way the truth eventually tells itself. I want to say one last thing. If you are sitting across a room from the person who embarrassed you, or across a table from the person who underestimated you, or across a kitchen from the person whose patterns you have been absorbing for too long, I want to say this. You do not need to engineer the consequence. You do not need to make the call or pull the string or craft the moment. What you need to do is be honest. With yourself first. About what you are seeing. About what you have been excusing. About the line between patience and erosion. And then you need to say the true thing, to the person who needs to hear it, at the moment when they are capable of hearing it, with the same clarity and steadiness you would want someone to offer you. That is not weakness. That is not passivity. That is the kind of power that lasts longer than any revenge. Because karma does not need your help. It just needs the truth to be told. And it takes care of the rest. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs it today.